was able to get up to Pearl in 2019. I saw the research going there and the number of universities that are involved. University of Toronto being the lead of 9, I think you mentioned. It seems like Pearl has gone from NSERC grant to NSERC grant and is doing longitudinal studies that are giving us changes over time in the atmosphere, now picking up on forest fire implications, looking at droughts and floods and atmospheric conditions that are changing in terms of moisture in the atmosphere. Really important work that seems to be reliant on short-term funding from fund to fund, and now you're in a precarious situation. What's your current ask to try to keep the doors open?
Right, thank you, Mr. Longfield. So our current ask right now, our submission to the pre-budget consultations was $15 million over 6 years. So that's about $2.5 million a year to do the science and also to give us the funding to be able to resume the program that we had in, working with some Nunavut communities. $1.5 million a year would kind of keep us going at a baseline level, but 2.5 is really what we had some years ago, and that's really what we would like to do to be able to allow us to do all the science plus more than science with northern communities.
In terms of the science research, there's new funds now going into the Arctic in other parts, and maybe Dr. Hick, in terms of your organization, involvement with an organization like Pearl, is there a communication path there, or is there opportunity there? I'm not asking you to approve funding at the table, but that doesn't seem like a lot of funding to do some very important research in Canada.
Well, I've worked with Dr. Strong for many years, and so we have good lines of communication. We're certainly aware of the valuable work that's been conducted at Pearl over the last couple of decades. And in fact, we're working together to, the Arctic's a big place, so we're working to expand some of the capabilities, observational capabilities that exist at Pearl at CHARS, at the High Arctic Research Station. That'll give us just a better understanding of the dynamics of the whole Arctic system. So in that context, we're supporting the research work, but the work at Pearl itself, as Dr. Strong indicated, given how remote it is, has additional requirements over and above how remote we feel in Cambridge Bay, just that much further into the Canadian High Arctic to maintain those operations.
I think you've highlighted one of the challenges, that Pearl is quite far north of any population base. The Inuit don't go that far north. Certainly not a lot of voters in that part of the territory. In terms of governance for Pearl, maybe Dr. Strong, how the University of Toronto has taken the lead and really kept the organization going over the last year where there's been a funding gap. But the University of Toronto doesn't qualify to support all of the universities up there in terms of governance. Could you maybe talk about Arctic research having to be a collaboration of governance, or how can we look at our study to support the collaborations that are required to do effective research?
So with Pearl, we really got started back in 2003, 4, 5 when we got funding from the Canada Foundation for Innovation. So that allowed us to install the equipment at existing Environment and Climate Change Canada building, and then bring up some containers and set up 2 other facilities. So we have 3 facilities at Eureka. So it was CFI that really enabled that at the beginning. And then we got 6 years of funding from the Canada Foundation for Climate and Atmospheric Sciences, which no longer exists. So that gave us stable funding for 6 years that enabled us to do, keep operations going and do the science. Then there was a gap for about a year or so, and then we were very fortunate to get funding under the NSERC Climate Change and Atmospheric Research Program, or CCAR, which was a one-off. There were 7 lucky winners, and we got funding from that, which we were able to stretch out to 2001 because of the COVID pandemic. Our expenses went down. We weren't able to travel up so far. We also got funding from the International Polar Year in 2007 and 8, and some funding from the Arctic Research Infrastructure Fund. So those were kind of 5 of the big funding programs. several of which don't exist. CIFCAS, right, CCAR, IPY, they don't exist anymore. And so we also have gotten funding, regular funding from the Canadian Space Agency because we do validation of satellite data, and they've been a very valuable funding partner. And Environment and Climate Change Canada, also because we're working at their facility, they help with some of the power costs, which is not an eligible expense under NSERC and other programs. So, over the last 20 years, we've written many, many proposals. They have not all been successful, but, enough have been. And so the challenge is that every funding program has its own requirements. And, those that require you to have community engagement, it's very hard to do that where we are. Our expenses are high. We try to piggyback on Environment and Climate Change Canada's monthly produce charters that bring food up to the station. But if we typically charter our own flights a couple times a year, they're more than $50,000 a pop, right? And then to have someone on site staying at the station, which is the only place, there's no community there, right? There's just the weather station. That's over $450 a day, right, for food and accommodation. So you send up half a dozen students for a few weeks, the costs add up, right? So having a programs that kind of recognize the cost of being in such a remote location are really quite critical.
Thank you.
Thank